When a game begins with your immediate death, it is usually one of disturbing tones and dire consequence. But in Cult of the Lamb, the kicker is that all the characters look like they belong in a Cartoon Network series. Now, don't let the friendly cartoon aesthetic fool you. There is a dark and morbid story here, loaded with evil magics, demon worship, ancient lore, and evil gods. The core gameplay is comprised of dungeon crawling in a roguelike fashion about half of the time, while the other half you will be focused on building and managing your cult, its land and resources, and its devoted followers, in order to feed your inner demon god strength and power. Cult of the Lamb is a unique combination of two genres that I think work really well together here, and turns out to be way more fun than I anticipated, all while looking stunning. The game starts off heavy out the gate. You are the last lamb alive, as the rest have all met their fate in sacrifice. You're led to slaughter, unknowingly fulfilling an ancient prophecy. Upon losing your head, you're then brought back to life and given endless power by a demon god who seeks to be freed of its shackles and rejoin the land of the living. Congratulations, you are now a servant of hell. Now go forth and conquer in its name and lead your followers to the promised land. You serve the one who waits, a god who was betrayed by a coalition of other gods, and so the fallen deity now schemes to exact its revenge. You will travel to 4 different domains and regions of land, each inhabited and influenced by one of the traitor gods that need to be killed. Each god that is expelled breaks one chain of the shackles to the one who waits, so you ultimately free it by doing its bidding and murdering those responsible for its imprisonment. Definitely got some very deep undertones here. Simply vanquishing the betrayers is not enough though, as you will spend much of your time in an RTS style management of your cult. This will give you the buffs and resources needed to grow stronger in battle and uphold your agreement, spreading your evil word and consuming the lives of your followers. So one of the first things you notice is that this game looks fantastic, as it's loaded with bright pops of color and excellently drawn and smoothly animated cartoon characters. I genuinely enjoy hand-drawn looking video games, and this is among the best I've seen. It has a 2.5D appearance with a dash of cell shading thrown in. It reminds me of Gravity Falls and Adventure Time, which are both fantastic fantasy series. The randomly generated dungeon stages look great and have little details dotted in, like wild mushrooms in the edges of the woods or squirrels that run for cover as you bash enemies down. Your settlement is a large chunk of land that is loaded with trees, rock formations, and patches of grass that blow in the wind. Fire flickers, bees and butterflies float around, birds land and steal your crops. The world breathes around you. When characters interact with one another, they have a range of facial animations that include smiling, laughing, anger, and fear. The range is impressive, as your followers can get sick and vomit, take shits, feel ill, sleep, and so much more. It's funny to me to just sit and watch all the interactions that go on, especially as your cult gets much larger. Because the more cult members there are, the more interactions you'll see. Mechanically, the focus will be on 2 things to progress your story. You'll either be managing your cult to include farming, cooking, giving sermons, disciplining, and a variety of other tasks. Or battling in procedurally generated dungeons and tracking down bosses that you must conquer. Remember, we signed a pact, so the evil deeds must be done. You can also find more followers while on missions by rescuing them from enemies or upon defeating mini-bosses. At the time, you essentially rescue them and send them back to the cult, but once they get back to camp, you can choose to level them up or sacrifice them. The cult management is actually intensive. It will start off slowly, but the requirements ramp up and push the pace in short order. I find myself juggling multiple errands at once because the cult leader's work is never done. You will have to manage the cult's needs based on gauges that deplete, depending on how little you've done. Hunger, belief, and illness are required inputs that will keep your followers happy and worshiping you, preventing both death and mutiny. You'll have random followers dissent and require appropriate dealings with, to include, again, sacrifice and imprisonment for re-education. And re-education is essentially just brainwashing, so it's definitely a balancing act that was more intensive and demanding than I expected. At one point, I spent so much time in dungeons that by the time I got back to my cult, they were all at really low faith and starving. And I thought, you know what, no problem. I'll just do a sermon and whip up some meals to satisfy them. Well, it turned out I had almost no stock of ingredients for food and my farm items weren't ready for yielding. So I had to scramble to get food, and luckily I was able to give a sermon that required my followers to fast for 3 days. And in this time, I was able to fish and farm enough to feed them afterwards and get them back to a normal level. But they were pissed up until that point. I was actually surprised how quickly things fall apart when you're not around. It happens way quicker than I expected. As you level up your cult through divine inspiration, which is essentially followers' devotion levels, you will have access to better equipment that increases output or yield or decreases input cost. If done right, you'll have a follower join, dedicate their life to you, grow old, and die, all in service to the cult. Like, I didn't know they could age and die like that, so when it happened, it took me by surprise. After that, you can either sacrifice them before their death, like it leading up to the death, or choose to bury them, or have a ritual where you hold a funeral. So after leveling up a little bit, one of the followers that ended up dying for me, I was able to reward their devotion by resurrecting them. And it's a sick ass ritual you do and they come back to life. It's pretty epic. Altogether, the strategy part is a welcome challenge, and I enjoyed it as much, if not more, than the combat. So speaking of combat, it's fairly simple and straightforward. You're able to pick up a weapon and curse attack upon starting each dungeon run. And as you progress, you'll have access to tarot cards that an NPC lets you pick from. And each card gives you a buff to help you on your journey. Every few levels, you'll also get chests and new weapons and spells that pop up. And a lot of them are stronger than what you start with. Weapons range from swords and axes to daggers and gauntlet-style claws, which ended up being my favorite weapons. Spells vary to include AoE attacks, projectiles, and even temporary invincibility. There is some strategy in picking your weapons, but overall it just comes down to playstyle. Some will prefer quicker weapons to slower, and for instance, you can get life-stealing attributes as opposed to like poison on your weapon. Your weapon attack is just a string of one-button presses, usually a 3 or 4 hit combo. So there's not really a lot of depth to that. You also have to roll. They include a roll so you can avoid a lot of projectiles and enemy attacks. It's all really simple, but I actually like that each run would provide new weapons and spells to use and all the randomness of it. Combat doesn't always have to be ultra deep with RPG style talent trees that never end. Sometimes less is more, and I enjoyed the simplicity as a break from the open worlds and math equations required to play games these days. There's so much more here than what I've listed, but I'm going to go ahead and leave that up to the player to go ahead and discover and enjoy themselves. Cult of the Lamb overall is an excellent game that is simple enough that just about anyone can pick it up and play. Logging an hour or two happens quickly, as it is easy to get so involved in management that you actually lose track of time. It's the combination of story, animation, and charm that makes this game really fun and unique. I definitely recommend Cult of the Lamb to fans of RTSs, roguelikes, unique gameplay, dark themes, and amazing visuals. I definitely hope to see more unique games like this in the future, and I hope that people will go ahead and support this game. That does it for my Cult of the Lamb review, so thanks for hanging out with me, and I hope you enjoyed the video. I will see you guys in the next one. Peace.